The West Highland Line is often described as one of the greatest railway journeys anywhere in the world. And while the section from Fort William to Mallaig is world famous for the Glenfinnan Viaduct and the Jacobite steam train, the journey from Glasgow to Crianlarich is every bit as fascinating. This is where the adventure truly begins. Leaving behind Scotland's largest city, the railway slowly escapes the suburbs and industrial landscapes of the Central Belt before entering a world of lochs, mountains, forests, glens, and remote highland scenery. For railway enthusiasts, this route offers an extraordinary mixture of history, engineering, dramatic landscapes, and atmosphere unlike anywhere else in Britain. And today we're going to travel this remarkable line together, exploring the history of the West Highland Railway, the famous places along the route, and why this line should be on every railway enthusiast's bucket list. Our journey begins here at Glasgow Queen Street Station. For generations, Queen Street has been the gateway to the Highlands. Beneath the great glass roof, modern ScotRail trains stand alongside memories of countless famous locomotives that once worked these routes. From steam locomotives of the North British Railway to BR Green Diesels, Class 37s, and today's modern units carrying passengers north into the Highlands. As the train departs Glasgow Queen Street, we immediately enter the famous Queen Street Tunnel beneath the city centre. Emerging into daylight, the contrast is striking. Behind us lies the busy city of Glasgow. Ahead lies one of the most scenic railway journeys in Europe. The line quickly begins climbing northwestward through the suburbs of Maryhill and Kelvindale. At first, this still feels like an urban railway. Commuter stations, roads, housing estates, and busy city life surround the line. But gradually, almost without noticing, the scenery begins to change. The buildings become less dense. The trees become thicker. The landscape begins to open up. This gradual transformation is one of the wonderful things about the West Highland Line. It feels like a true journey from city to wilderness. Historically, much of this early section of route was built by several different railway companies during the Great Victorian Railway Age. The various sections that would later become the West Highland Line were eventually linked together into the famous route we know today. By the late 19th century, railway companies were desperate to reach the Highlands. Tourism was growing rapidly. Victorian travellers were becoming fascinated by the romance of Scotland. And railways promised to open remote areas to visitors from Glasgow and beyond. As we continue northwestward, the train passes through Dumbarton. This ancient town sits beside the River Clyde and is dominated by the dramatic volcanic rock of Dumbarton Castle. The castle has guarded this strategic point for well over 1,000 years and remains one of the most historically important fortresses in Scotland. For passengers on the railway, it creates an unforgettable sight rising steeply above the town. Soon after Dumbarton, the line begins to feel noticeably more rural, and then we reach one of the key moments of the entire journey. Craigendoran Junction. This is generally considered the true beginning of the West Highland Line itself. From here, the railway turns northward away from the busy suburban network around Glasgow and begins its climb into the Highlands. Almost immediately, the scenery becomes spectacular. The railway hugs the hillsides high above Garloch and Loch Lomond, offering magnificent panoramic views across the water. For many passengers, this is the moment the journey truly comes alive. On one side are steep wooded hills. On the other, vast sea lochs stretching into the distance. And threading between them is this remarkable railway line. The engineering required to build the West Highland Railway was extraordinary. When construction began in the early 1890s, many people believed the route would be impossible to complete economically. The terrain was harsh and mountainous. Weather conditions could be brutal, and the population along much of the route was sparse. Yet despite these challenges, the railway pushed onward. The line to Fort William finally opened in 1894, creating a direct rail connection deep into the Western Highlands. And what a railway they created! As the train continues northward, we pass Garraloch Head. Today it is a quiet Highland village, but the area has long held military importance due to its proximity to Faslane and the Firth of Clyde. The scenery here is already becoming increasingly dramatic. The railway curves through forests and rocky cuttings, while mountains begin rising higher around us. Soon, the line reaches one of the most beautiful sections of the entire journey: the shores of Loch Lomond. Few places in Scotland are more famous than Loch Lomond. Immortalised in songs, poems, paintings and literature, the loch forms part of the Loch Lomond and the Trossachs National Park. And from the railway, the views can be breathtaking. The line runs high above parts of the loch, offering wonderful glimpses across the water toward distant mountains. On clear days, the scenery here is absolutely magnificent. Blue water sparkles beneath highland peaks, while forests stretch down toward the shoreline. For railway enthusiasts, this combination of railway and landscape feels almost perfect. There's a wonderful sense of tranquility here. Unlike high-speed main lines elsewhere in Britain, the West Highland Line encourages passengers to slow down and simply enjoy the journey. As the train continues north, the mountains become increasingly dramatic. The railway now enters Glenfalloch. This is where the Highlands truly begin to dominate the landscape. Steep mountains rise on either side of the railway, while waterfalls tumble down rocky slopes after heavy rain. In autumn, the hills glow with reds, oranges and golds. In winter, snow transforms the entire landscape into something almost magical. And in summer, long Highland evenings bathe the mountains in beautiful golden light. No matter the season, the scenery along the West Highland Line is unforgettable. For many rail enthusiasts, this route represents the very essence of scenic railway travel. It combines everything people love about railways: historic engineering, remote landscapes, dramatic weather, beautiful stations, and the feeling of travelling through truly wild country. One of the most fascinating aspects of the line is how isolated parts of it feel despite being relatively close to Glasgow. Within only a couple of hours, passengers have travelled from one of Britain's largest cities into landscapes that feel almost untouched by modern life. And that contrast gives the route much of its magic. As we continue climbing through Glenfalloch, the railway twists and curves through increasingly rugged highland scenery. The mountains seem to close in around the train. Streams rush beneath bridges. Moorland stretches into the distance. And occasionally deer can be spotted on the hillsides. This is railway travel at its most atmospheric. The West Highland Line has also become famous worldwide thanks to tourism and photography. Railway photographers travel from across the globe to capture trains against the dramatic Highland backdrop. And unlike many scenic railways, this route feels beautiful in almost every type of weather. Bright sunshine creates stunning reflections across the lochs. Mist and rain transform the mountains into something mysterious and cinematic. Snow creates scenes that look almost Arctic. And during stormy weather, the entire landscape feels wild and untamed. Eventually, after one of the most scenic railway approaches in Britain, we arrive at Crianlarich. This small Highland village is one of the most important railway junctions in Scotland. Here, the West Highland Line divides. One route heads west toward Oban. The other continues north toward Fort William and Mallaig. For generations, Crianlarich has been a vital stopping point for Highland travellers. Steam locomotives once paused here for water and servicing, while passengers stretched their legs beneath the surrounding mountains. Even today, there is still something wonderfully nostalgic about Crianlarich Station. Surrounded by Highland scenery, It feels like a gateway to the remote north and west of Scotland. And for railway enthusiasts, the journey from Glasgow to Crianlarich is far more than simply the first section of the West Highland Line. It is a magnificent railway journey in its own right. A route filled with history, atmosphere, engineering achievement, and some of the finest scenery anywhere on the British railway network. Whether you are travelling for the first time or returning once again to the Highlands, this railway has a unique ability to capture the imagination. It reminds us why rail travel can still feel exciting, why journeys matter, and why some railways become legendary. The West Highland Line is not simply transportation, it is an experience, a moving window into some of the most beautiful landscapes in Europe. And without question, every railway enthusiast should experience this remarkable journey at least once in their lifetime. Thank you very much for travelling with us along the wonderful West Highland Line from Glasgow to Crianlarich. We hope you've enjoyed this journey through the Scottish Highlands and the history of one of Britain's most spectacular railways. If you did enjoy the video, please do give it a like, share it with fellow railway enthusiasts, and subscribe to the channel for more railway journeys, railway history, archive footage, driver's eye views, and classic rail adventures from across Britain and beyond. And until next time, thanks for watching.